and welcome to the second NAEPSDP webinar of 2017. We're excited that you've joined us this morning. Today we have got Mr. Bobby Clark with the Virginia Extension Service. And Bobby is a senior ag and natural resources agent in Shenandoah County there in Virginia. And today he's going to be sharing with us about an assessment of the programmatic level of extension agent work in Virginia. So Bobby, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, good morning. How are you? It's good to be here this morning, and today I'm here to talk about a thing that we've titled An Assessment of the Programmatic Level of Extension Agent Work in Virginia. And I'm presenting this on behalf of the Virginia Cooperative Extension District Program Leadership Team. Now, to start off with, I'll give you an overview of the extension programming model we use in Virginia. And we start off with with situation analysis. And once you understand the situation, you move to educational program and design and implementation. And then we move to program evaluation and reporting. And the whole time you're doing this process, you're working with stakeholders, you're evaluating yourself at every step. But this is the basics of the extension programming model. Now, to give you some background about the Extension Program Leadership Team, Virginia Cooperative Extension developed the statewide program leadership team in October 2013. That's when we started. There was a pilot group prior to that, but the whole statewide thing started in October 2013. And it consists of 2 family consumer science agents, 2 4-H agents, and 2 A&R agents in each district. There's 4 districts in the state, so 24 agents. And our job was we were charged with the duty of training new agents on how to conduct sound programming in their communities and to help agents hone their programming skills. So essentially, we were charged to be extension agents to the extension agents. We did focus a lot, or have focused a lot, on new agents, but we do work with all agents. Now, the purpose of this assessment was to get a better understanding of how extension agents are programming and to understand their level of programming. Now, the assessment does not tell us why extension agents are programming at their current level. That would be, if you will, the assessment is a situation analysis so that us agents can be extension agents to the extension agents. But you would need to do, or we are doing, a bit more work to figure out why agents are programming at their current level. Now, the basic methodology of the assessment. Well, we developed a template to assess 2014 impacts that extension agents submitted, and we field tested that in 1 district. And then the next year, after we did that initial pilot assessment, we said, okay, we're going to do this statewide. But before we implemented the thing statewide, we did make revisions to the assessment tool, and then we held a training for all of the evaluators, which turned out to be the 24 DPLT members. And then after we did a training, we handed all of the evaluators 5 impact statements to review. And they turned their results in, and we had a second training or a meeting to go over that, to try to go through a process to have consistency with our evaluations. So once we got that done, we grabbed up all the 2015 impact assessments, randomized them, distributed them to all the DPLT members to evaluate. And in each one of those, we had the same 3 impact statements that every evaluator did to try to monitor consistency. Now, the basic impact of an extension impact statement, or the basic format of an extension impact statement in Virginia, is these 3 components. They go relevance, response, and result. And in Virginia, we require these things to be, each section is limited to 1,500 characters. Now, extension in Virginia has been using this format for probably over 10 years. It's well accepted by agents. Agents routinely use these things. We write our impact statements as part of our annual reports, which are submitted for performance review. And most of us agents will pull those impact statements out of there and tweak them a little bit and then use them for our boards of supervisors or for statewide reports or for reporting back to our farmers or whoever our audience is as far as what our accomplishments are. So they're well used across the state. But they're in the three sections: relevance, about situation analysis; response is about how did you respond, what did you do as an agent, or what did your group do, and then result, what is the impact of your work. Now, the statewide impact assessment that we did in January 2016, 228 extension agents submitted 792 impact statements in their annual reports. Now, each of these 792 impacts were unique. And what I mean by that is for example, if you had a team of 4 agents that were all working on the same thing, in many cases, they may write one impact statement and all 4 of them would put that in their impact or in their annual report. But for this assessment, it only showed up one time because there's always a lead agent, and it would show up under that lead agent's name. And it wouldn't, and that wouldn't show up 4 times, it would only show up 1 time. So that's quite a few impact statements for all of our agents. It worked out to be an average of 3.47 impacts per agent. And in my conversation with our district directors, for the most part, they want agents to submit in that 3 to 4 range. So we seem to be on target, but I can tell you there are some agents out there who are submitting 8 and 9 impacts, unique impacts just by themselves. And our district directors really don't want to see that many, actually. Now, one of the first things we did when we evaluated these impacts was we categorized them according to the type of impact by program area. So the evaluator would read it and say, okay, this is a family consumer science type impact, and that was what it would count as. Or the combined group is, like for example, if it might have been a blend of family consumer sciences and youth programming, so we stuck it in the combined category. In looking at these, you will notice there's not an equitable number of extension agents. For example, there's more A&R agents than there are FCS agents in Virginia. And so therefore, there's more impact statements written by A&R agents. And we think that these numbers closely mimic the number of extension agents in the various categories across the state. The next thing we did in our impact assessment was we evaluated what type of impact it was. The evaluator would read the thing and say, okay, there's economic numbers in here and it's all about economics, so we'll call it an economic impact, whereas another impact statement might have been more of a social impact. And we had 4 categories. It was no impact, the statement didn't fit any category because there was no impact, or maybe it was just about administrative or something, and economic, social, and environmental. And here's how these numbers came out. This is the actual results from the statewide survey. You can just look at the bars. I was actually surprised that so many of our impacts fell into the social category. I had no idea that many of our impacts fit that category. That was a surprise to me. And you can see we did have a blending here. We had a few impacts that the evaluators thought met the economic, social, and environmental category. Again, here, there's no right or wrong, good or bad. This is just how they fell out. The next question we asked was the local situation identified? The evaluator would read the whole impact statement and then answer 1 of 3 questions. Either the local situation was not defined at all, or number 2, the local situation was described but not quantified, or the description was vague, or only a statewide or national data. And so that got a number 2, somewhat defined. And number 3, a well-defined impact statement the local situation would have been described and quantified. Now, I'm going to give an example of some well-defined impacts in a minute. And here's what the data looked like in Virginia for this year. Only about 29% of the impact statements were well defined, but there was a larger group that were somewhat defined. Again, there's no real right or wrong here. This is just what the data says. Now here's an example, or 3 examples of some well-defined impact statements. I wrote 3 statements down here. For example, the author, the extension agent may have wrote in their impact statement, 50% of the children in Adams County are obese, or the average weaning weight of cattle in PD 12 is 450 pounds, and this is 50 pounds below the state average and 20 pounds below the national average. Or statewide bankruptcy rate is 2%, and in Jones County it's 4%. And that was, if you will, how high the bar was to reach a definition of a well-defined impact statement. And in my opinion, that's not an extremely high bar, but nonetheless, it was at the level you had to achieve. The next thing we did was we asked the question, was the need expressed locally? And here again, the number 1 equals no. Number 2 was somewhat. In the somewhat category, it was either not clear there was an expression from anyone locally, or that this need truly existed, or the wordage was real vague, or the need was only expressed at the state and national level. A lot of impacts come in, and the agent will quote state data or national data, and as the evaluator, you read it and you think, okay, this agent is in a county or works a 5-county area, and one has to ask himself, does anybody locally think that's important? And then to reach a number 3, or a yes, the impact was expressed locally, there was some clear expression of local need from a few individuals or group, or a situation analysis, or some sort of needs assessment process. And those numbers look very similar to the first numbers about situation analysis. Numbers, the bars are just about the same, it looks like. And I think if you have questions, we get to them at the end. Now, to give you a few examples of what this would look like, here as my examples, 3 pediatricians that serve Adams County expressed concern about childhood obesity, or the extension agent advisory group for the animal science agent in PD 12 expressed a priority goal on improving livestock profitability, or the Jones County Board of Supervisors expressed concern that an alarming number of their citizens were having financial problems. Any of these 3 statements would achieve that level of the need was expressed locally. Not a real high bar, but nonetheless, there was some clear expression there. Now next, we move to what you may call the program design and implementation. What did the extension agent do? And we asked the question, what type of response was it? And we have 4 categories here, 4 numbers. And the number 1 was only one learning experience, such as a single meeting or attendance at 4-H camp or one trip to Richmond. And number 2 was the same learning experience taught multiple times. For example, I do 4 private pesticide recertification trainings in the 5 counties I serve, and it's the exact same meeting, the exact same words done 4 different times at 4 different meetings. So that would be just the same learning experience taught multiple times. The number 3 rating was multiple learning experiences, such as a 5-part series, maybe a 5-part series on family financial management, or a 5-part series on farm transition planning, or something like that. And the number 4 category was multiple learning experiences, such as multiple learning experiences that were trying to achieve a goal, but all of the learning experiences were different, such as at least 3 different educational experiences that collectively achieved the same outcome, such as educational meetings, plus demonstrations, plus a newsletter, plus one-on-one, plus television interviews, something like that. And here's what the data looked like. Undefined was just the reader couldn't define what the learning experience was. The 2 bars in yellow are essentially, in my mind, the same thing. It's just the learner is getting information one time. And the blue bar, of course, is a series of classes, and the green bar is multiple learning experiences. Now, I have some examples of a couple of these learning experiences to maybe drive this home. In red, we have an example of the same experience but multiple sessions, such as we gave a presentation to every sixth grader in Adams County about healthy eating. It was just 12 classes reaching 360 children, so possibly the agent or a volunteer went to 12 classes and gave the exact same presentation 12 different times. And to twist that into multiple learning experiences would be, we conducted a healthy snack sampling session at 6 of our 10 4-H clubs and at 4-H camp. The fair display focused on healthy eating. Our public speaking contest focused on healthy eating. We had 5 newspaper articles and blogs about healthy eating, and we provided a handout to all the 6th grade students. So that's trying to achieve this goal about healthy eating multiple ways, all teaching kids different venues, different avenues, different children. And I'm going to move back to the green bar or to the data just a second. And you can kind of see how many of our agents are using that multiple learning experience type of approach. There's a very large number of extension agents, if you will, that are using this orange yellow bar category, which is just one learning experience. Now we'll probably move to the most complicated slide, and that is our attempt to evaluate the actual level of programming that people were achieving. And again, we have a numerical measure. Number 1 and 2, if the evaluator gave it a number 1 or 2, they were largely read an impact and said, you know, this really isn't about the programming model. And number 1 was unit coordinator or administrative impact. I would read an impact, and it might have been from a unit coordinator about something about teamwork in the office. And if I would have been that unit coordinator, I probably would have wrote that because it was something to be proud of, but it isn't about teaching the citizens. It was about internal stuff. And number 2 was just work completed, and as an evaluator, you may read an impact and say, you know, all this agent did was describe work, but I cannot see where they're moving toward any kind of an impact at all. And number 3 is actually the beginning level of programming. And here the impact statement is similar to 2. It might have just been about work completed, but as a reader, you could say, you know, I can actually see where this agent is going to move to an impact here, or they're actually stating I'm at my beginning stages. And number 4 is that awareness created category. Sometimes, for example, if Farmer Jones doesn't know there's a better way, he first has to become aware there's a better way before he actually learns what the better way is. And what we had written in our instructions was awareness created about the extension education program or participants learned a new, better technology exists. And number 5 was that knowledge skills gain category. Very typically an impact there would read, I did a meeting, and right at the end of the meeting, before people went home, I gave them a survey, and they wrote on the survey that they learned something. And that would be knowledge gain, such as I learned how to take a soul sample. Number 6 is actual intended practice change of the participants. And here the participants indicate their intention to make a practice change. Now, again, I would assume that could be done right at the end of a meeting. I had a meeting, I gave a survey, and the participant said, I will change. I will take soul samples. I will eat healthier. I intend to do this other thing I want to do. That would be intended practice change. Now, the number 7, practice change, the actual practice change for participants. We set a bar here that if the author wrote that they did a meeting and they did the survey before people walked out the door, that could not meet this level because the participants actually had to do what it was they were trying to change. It could only follow an educational activity, such as somebody saying, I did take soul samples. And the number 8 is practice change for extended learners or community-wide result. There was 2 categories here that would meet this requirement. And option 1 was The result is expressed as an action change or a benefit for both the direct participants and an extended learner. And our definition of extended learner here was, for example, the extension agent taught Farmer Jones a practice, and Farmer Smith down the road saw Farmer Jones making saw the change that Farmer Jones implemented, and Farmer Smith also made the change. That's just an example. And option 2 was the result is expressed in terms of direct participant action. You know, Farmer Jones made a change and it benefited water quality, which benefited the community as a whole. Here's what the data looks like from that. And as you can see, the majority of our extension agents are reporting at this knowledge gain category. And I sort of color-coded some stuff for different, what I vision as stages. The 2 red bars are largely outside of the programming model, and these 3 orange bars are at the beginning stages of programming to me. And then this intended practice change or practice change are sort of a little bit of a higher level of programming, if you will. And I have a couple examples to help drive home these different levels of programming. Here's an example of knowledge gain. 30 participants, at the end of a class, 30 participants completed a survey, and 95% said they learned how to take a soil sample, or 100% said they learned the importance of maintaining pH. There was a lot of impact statements I read that pretty much were just like this. Actual practice change, here's an example of that. 2 months after the class, participants were surveyed and they reported the following. 100% are choosing more lean proteins. 96% are choosing more leafy greens. A couple key components, it says 2 months after the class, and it actually says the participants are actually doing something here. And here's another example of practice change for participants. Over the last 4 years, 10 farmers have shifted 1,000 acres of their corn from conventional planting to no-till. So the farmers are actually doing something differently. And I got 2 examples of community-wide benefit. In this example, it says, since the program began in 2012, children being arrested for vandalizing or stealing has decreased from 100 arrests per year in 2011 to 15 in 2016. In addition, school attendance rate is greatly improved, and we believe the overall school test scores are improving. And it goes on to say, in 2011, the vandalism and theft cost town homeowners and businesses over $5 million, whereas the total cost from 2014 through 2016 was only $250,000. So here we show something that the learner group is doing. They decreased, arrest went down, but that there's a piece at the bottom that talks about the actual community benefit of that, the reduced vandalism. That'd be a tremendous impact, but nonetheless, it's an example. And here's a different example of community-wide benefit. In 2010, less than 2% of the 5,000 sheep farmers in the region were using stool samples and FAMACHA parasite management system to manage internal parasites in their flocks. But in 2016, 40% of them are now using these practices, and it goes on to show an economic benefit. The key here is that the way I define this as community, it is the entire community of sheep farmers that is being impacted here, not just 2 or 3 farmers. I'm going to move back up to the data so you can see that again and look at the different stages. It is interesting to me that less than 5% of our impacts are written at the community-wide result. And when I read through the group I read through, I did notice a trend that some agents tended to communicate a lot at that community-wide basis, and other agents didn't communicate there at all. Just a side note. Okay. This is a little side note from the 2014 impact, which is not statewide, it was just district-wide. When we did this one, I got a hold of the data that showed the tenure of each extension agent. For example, one extension agent had been on the job for 3 years versus the agent who'd been on the job for 15. And since we used numerical numbers on these on our evaluation, I was able to numerically score them. And in essence, a low score, if you added all the numbers up, was a lower level of impact than a real high number would be a higher level of impact. And you'll notice here that it peaks out in about year 7. And I've only done this one time, and you'll notice this valley at year 6. I know that valley is an anomaly. It was only 2 or 3 impact statements because we just had a couple agents who happened to have 6 years of tenure at that time. It peaked out at year 7, and I theorize that that many agents get on the job, they work for a while, and then they start doing a really good job, and then I theorize that they graduate those programs and move to something new, and that explains the downward slide here. It's either that or they're getting lazy, which I don't think is true, but I would be very interested in doing this a few times and see if this trend continues. I think this is also a useful teaching piece with newer agents to show them where they might want to be in terms of when you hire a brand new agent, they're not always going to be at that very highest level in the first or second year. And when agents try to do that, they usually end up not doing such a good job because they try too hard too fast. We also evaluated the dollar value of the monetary impact. And in our goal here, we essentially said to the evaluator, you read the impact, and if the agent reports a dollar value, you record it. You write it down on the sheet. And for example, if the impact stated that $500 were saved or $1,000 in improvement in net income or whatever the number was, you write the dollar number down, and you do not determine if you think it's right or wrong or good or bad or whether they did their calculations right. You just write the number down. And here's what the numbers look like. Shows that 20 of all the 4-H impacts had a dollar value reported with them, and it ended up being about $1.9 million. And 50 of the ANR impacts were up to $37 million, and 8 of the family consumer science impacts were there. I had these 2 other things that I wrote in here. 3 different agents in the state reported the statewide value of Master Gardener volunteers. And I saw that, so I pulled it out and only stuck it in here one time. And that number is 9.5 million for Virginia for that 2015 impact year. And we had one tobacco impact that was at 97 million. There was nothing right or wrong about it. It was just such a large number. I felt like if I added it to the total A&R, it sort of threw the numbers off a little bit. So you can see the total economic impact that was reported by agents in the 2015 year was $146 million. And that was for the 702 impacts. I guess there's another 50 or so that we missed. So I'm guessing this number is a little higher in reality. There is the possibility that up here in the A&R, 4-H, and FCS category, there may have been some volunteer value in there. I did not read every one. I just happened to see this number, 9.59 million, occurred 3 times. And so I asked myself, why was that? And once I discovered that, I pulled that data out. Some positive impacts of the results. Over half of the impacts reported were at the level of knowledge gained or higher. Extension agents did report $146 million in benefit, and I did see some impressive things. So there's a lot of good impacts in there. So what's the next step in Virginia? So we have this data, and we kind of have a better handle on the situation analysis. So what's next for us in Virginia? Well, we've taken some next steps, but we literally finished the impact report in the fall of 2016, so we're not very far beyond that next step process. we came up with 4 focus areas to focus on in Virginia. Number 1 and 2 are about situation analysis. 29% of the impact statements gave the reader a clear understanding of the local situation. And again, we focused on this thing about the express need. Was the express need offered? And number 3 down here, over 70% of the impact statements were at the level of knowledge gained or lower. So that's another focus area. And number 4 was the thing about extension agents. Only 12% reported an economic benefit. So these were our 4 areas of focus that we're trying to focus on in the future. Now, to expand on this a little bit, a few extra words about the impact statements. This is something that actually I think Mike worked on and happened last week with the district program leadership team. I've actually rotated off so that he's working on that. And it says impact statements should give a clear understanding of the local situation, and impact statements should clearly reflect that the local community was expressing a need for the educational program. And under the category of the programming level, we have a goal that more agents should be reporting practice change or higher for program participants. So we should try to move to that level of practice change or higher for program participants. And finally, economic impact. We want to see more impact statements should include an economic benefit where appropriate. And naturally, we know that not every impact statement will be able to include an economic benefit. And I summarized this graphically with this slide. It's a really busy slide, but it's pretty simple. It comes down, when you look at it, the basic goal is we want all the red bars to go up. And naturally, if the red bars go up, all the blue bars are going to come down a little bit. And that's kind of a summary of the goal, if you will, the next step. In addition, next steps in Virginia, we're going to be continuing our district program leadership teams as we have. And while I was participating, I had one-on-one meetings with agents. We do a thing we call First Fridays that's coordinated by another DPLT member. We meet with small groups of agents, and we try to have small trainings and things to teach them programming as we go. I think one of the next most important steps is Virginia is going to reinitiate the Extension Programming Institute. And this is a thing where agents have to apply to participate, and we have sessions where you might go for 3 days to a training and immerse yourself in the programming process. So we have decided that our agents that just casual training, an hour here and an hour there, may not quite be getting done what we need to, so we're going to go back to a more formal training process on programming.
Thank you, Bobby. I think you've done a fantastic job, and we really appreciate you sharing your project and the results with us today. Thank you for joining us.